is now the one person directly involved in the case who has no reason to deceive. His book is what the trial should have been, the facts as they happened, and the evidence as it was found. And finally, it was a murder case involving only one suspect who was on trial for killing two people. Yet the only person convicted of anything was Detective Fuhrman, the detective who did everything he was supposed to do at the crime scene, and whose conviction involved a circumstance that had nothing to do with the murders. The Simpson case has come to symbolize much more than the brutal murder of two innocent people. Instead, it symbolizes how racial prejudice can be exploited for the benefit of the few at the expense of the many. And it symbolizes how our system of justice, the very backbone of our democracy, is easily exploited and damaged, again for the benefit of the few and at the expense of the many. If Mark Fuhrman can play even a small role in correcting these wrongs, he will have succeeded as an author, and we will have succeeded as his publisher. Alfred S. Regnery, Publisher. Forward. There are many victims in the Simpson murder case other than Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman. But once we get past their surviving loved ones, no one has been unjustifiably victimized by these murders more than Mark Fuhrman. Awakened from his sleep at 1:05 in the early morning hours of June 13th, 1994, he went to the Bundy crime scene and, for several hours thereafter, participated in the investigation of the murders. Among his observations, he found a bloody right-hand glove on the grounds of O.J. Simpson's estate, which was the mate of a left-hand glove found at the Bundy murder scene. Though he did nothing wrong at all, and no one has been able to produce a speck of evidence to the contrary, his involvement in the investigation has almost destroyed his life. Even before his unfortunate error or lie on the witness stand, I speak in the disjunctive because it is not clear, at least to me, which it was, that he had not used the N-word in the previous 10 years. He was publicly accused by Simpson's defense team of being a virulent racist who had done one of the most despicable deeds that one human can do to another: frame O.J. Simpson for the murders. After his error or lie on the witness stand, he was maligned and vilified perhaps more than any other person within recent memory, not even excluding O.J. Simpson. At least Simpson has a significant percentage of the population who still believe in his innocence and sing his praises. Not so with Fuhrman by the end of the trial. It seemed he had no friends. In Johnny Cochran's final summation to the jury, he referred to Fuhrman as a genocidal racist, a perjurer, America's worst nightmare, the personification of evil, and even compared him to Adolf Hitler. Unbelievably, even the prosecutors joined in the vilification of Fuhrman. Marcia Clark actually telling the jury in her summation, "Do we wish that there were no such person on this planet? Yes." In fact, even his superiors at the LAPD denounced him severely, and not one of the talking heads on television who have made a cottage industry out of commentating on the Simpson case had one good word to say about Fuhrman. In a telephone conversation with Mark Fuhrman on the morning of October 14th, 1996, he told me, "Vince, I just returned from my first meeting with my PO, probation officer. Can you imagine that? Mark Fuhrman, who devoted years of his life, as all police officers do, so that the rest of us can live in a safer and more civilized America, and at the very worst had committed the most insignificant kind of perjury, was now a felon. But O.J. Simpson, who murdered two human beings, brutally cutting them down in the springtime of their lives, was acquitted of the murder charges and out playing golf with a smile on his face." When my book, Outrage, The 5 Reasons Why O.J. Simpson Got Away with Murder, was first published in June of 1996, and I pointed out the terrible injustice of what had happened to Mark Fuhrman, his mother, Billy, called me crying and said, "You're the only one who stuck up for my son." It wasn't difficult for me to do. After all, as I've said, Fuhrman had done absolutely nothing wrong at all during his investigation of these murders. And even if we assumed he lied on the witness stand, it probably wasn't even perjury. Lay people are under the erroneous impression that lying under oath is automatically perjury, but it's not. Granted, it's the most important element of the corpus delicti of perjury, but there is a second element to perjury under Section 118 of the California Penal Code. The lie has to concern some material matter. That is, it must be relevant to an issue in the case. For instance, unless a witness's age or weight is somehow relevant to an issue in the case, their lying under oath about their age or weight is not perjury. Fuhrman's alleged lie about not using a racial slur within the previous 10 years was not, in my judgment, perjury, since it had nothing to do with whether Simpson was guilty or not guilty of these murders. A great many people have asserted that the sentence imposed upon Fuhrman by the judge on the perjury charge, 3 years probation and a $200 fine, was far too lenient. I don't agree at all. There is nothing sacrosanct about a person receiving punishment for a crime exclusively by way of a sentence handed out by a court. It's just that a court sentence is the typical and usually best way of bringing about justice. Many times, however, the punishment has already been imposed upon the defendant by extra-legal means. Nowhere is that reality exemplified more clearly than with respect to Mark Fuhrman. In addition to his name being defamed and besmirched throughout the nation, and his becoming an object of ridicule and even satire on comedy shows, Fuhrman was forced into an early retirement, and after his no-contest plea to the perjury charge on October 22, 1996, he is now a convicted felon, no longer having, among other things, the right to vote or even own a firearm of any kind. And, like all things in life, there are degrees of perjury. For those purists who maintain that perjury is perjury and it is all equally bad, I would assume that to be consistent, they would believe that all conspiracy is the same, be it a conspiracy to commit murder or conspiracy to commit petty theft, disturb the peace, or maybe birdwatch. Perhaps the most serious perjury would be a witness knowingly and falsely accusing an innocent person of a crime. Though not condoning it in any way, on a scale of 1 to 10, Fuhrman's perjury, if we assume it was perjury, was a 1. He simply didn't want to admit, he was too embarrassed to admit in front of a predominantly black jury that he had used the racial slur nigger within the past 10 years. But since his use of the epithet had no relevance to any issue in the case, Judge Lance Ito should have never allowed the defense to even ask Fuhrman whether he had used it. It was an egregiously erroneous ruling by Ito that was in contravention of Section 352 of the California Evidence Code. Section 352 provides that if the relevance of offered evidence, in this case Fuhrman's use of the N-word, is substantially outweighed by the probability of prejudice to the opposing side, the evidence should be excluded. Here, the relevance of Fuhrman using the N-word was extremely remote at best. I mean, it is a non sequitur and broad jump of Olympian proportions to conclude that just because someone used the N-word, or is even a racist, that they're going to go around framing black people for murder. But the probability of prejudice to the opposing side, the prosecution, was more than the requisite substantial. It was monumental, and hence should have been excluded. Even if Ito did not want to follow the law in this case, common sense, which Ito exhibited precious little of during the trial, should have told him that it was improper to allow the defense to ask Fuhrman the subject question. Every day throughout the land, thousands of white police officers arrest or investigate black suspects. Does anyone really believe that when these thousands upon thousands of cases come to court, it is perfectly proper to ask every one of these officers whether he has ever used the N-word within the previous 10 years? And if he denies it and you can prove that he did, have a separate satellite trial on that issue? Which is precisely what essentially happened during the Simpson murder trial. In my opinion, the entire Fuhrman matter was blown completely out of proportion. The Fuhrman affair reminds me of the theoretical situation of a traffic ticket being contested and ending up in the United States Supreme Court. Much Ado About Nothing.